Let's continue the conversation now with pollster John Zogby of Zogby Analytics, Skyping in tonight from Key West, Florida. Likewise Skyping in, but from a different clime, up in Northern Virginia. We're joined by New York Times bestselling author, presidential historian, and Reagan biographer Craig Shirley. Gentlemen, we always appreciate your time here on Newsmax Prime. And Craig, first to you, in the wake of South Carolina, where will evangelical voters go? Will they turn back to Ted Cruz, or is Donald Trump locked in on that voting bloc?
Well, JD, I think that the ice has been broken in South Carolina, and once you do something, it becomes easier to do it, easier to repeat it, and so that evangelicals, of course, you know, they spread across, they're not bound in by state boundaries, so that, and everybody knows evangelicals voted for Donald Trump in South Carolina, so I suspect that they're going to continue to vote for Donald Trump in forthcoming primaries in Tennessee and Texas and other southern and Bible Belt states. And I suspect actually it's going to become easier for them now that South Carolina has kind of broken the glass wall, so to speak.
John Zogby, what is going to happen with the supporters of Jeb Bush? You know, I think a lot of people just assume they're going to go to Marco Rubio, but former Pennsylvania governor and former Secretary of Homeland Security Tom Ridge, who originally endorsed Jeb, has turned to John Kasich. How do you think that fault line will develop? How many will go to Rubio, but how many might end up with Kasich?
Remember now, for a former protege, Marco Rubio and his people, despite the nice words the other night, Marco Rubio and his people have some bad blood with Jeb Bush, and there's some healing that has to take place. But in addition to that, when we talk about Jeb Bush, conservative but moderate to conservative, meaning that John Kasich fills that prototype as well. And to the degree that any of those folks think that John Kasich is viable, especially going up into Ohio and in Michigan and in the Midwest, some of them, like Tom Ridge, may head over in that direction. I suspect, though, that if Rubio handles it properly, he can finesse his way and get the bulk of those supporters in the interests of being the man who can defeat Donald Trump.
On the subject of John Kasich, obviously he is still campaigning energetically. Craig, he wasn't too far from you. Earlier today in Fairfax, Virginia, he was answering this question about how he first got elected. Let's listen to his response.
We just got an army of people who, and many women who left their kitchens to go out and go door to door and to put yard signs up for me all the way back when, you know, things were different. Now you call homes and everybody's out working, but...
First off, I want to say your comment earlier about the women came out of the kitchen to support you. I'll come to support you, but I won't be coming out of the kitchen.
I gotcha. I gotcha.
All right, part of the dynamics of a town hall. I think John caught himself, didn't he, Craig? Because he said, okay, that was back then, but now, and then he shorted up with a lady in the audience. But will that kitchen comment hurt him?
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think this will be a 47% moment, as was for Mitt Romney several years ago. He caught himself and he moved on pretty smoothly. So I don't think this will trip him up at all.
With a minute to go, let me turn to the pollster and cite new polling numbers from Emerson College concerning Massachusetts. That's where Kasich hopes to do well, but he'll have to make up a lot of ground to catch Donald Trump. Trump on top at 50%, then Marco Rubio at 16%, Kasich at 13%, Cruz at 10%, and Ben Carson with only 2%. If Trump appeals to Massachusetts Republicans, John Zogby, in the 40 seconds left in this segment, is he unstoppable?
He's getting there. He's almost unstoppable. He's ahead in 10 of the 14 states that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of weeks or so. And Rubio is getting a lot of attention, but Rubio has a lot of work to do. John Kasich, there's positive momentum, but there's also negative momentum too. That whole idea of, well, let me just hang on a little bit till I get to my states. We know that this primary sequence doesn't work that way. It's a sequential process.
Yes, it is. And hold that thought, John. We're going to come back to it because ours is a sequential process as well. We'll continue our discussion after this.
divided, we're going to lose. There aren't enough of us. We have to be united if we're going to win. And if you nominate me, we will unite the Republican Party and the conservative movement.
Marco Rubio trying to rally Republican voters to his side as tomorrow night Nevada conducts its GOP caucus. You'll recall we mentioned earlier Donald Trump won big in South Carolina. Senator Rubio narrowly edged out Ted Cruz for second place. But what about the momentum first for tomorrow night and then later on for Super Tuesday? Rejoining us for more, New York Times bestselling author, presidential historian, and Reagan biographer Craig Shirley, whose new book is entitled Last Act: The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Also joining us, John Zogby of Zogby Analytics. He is the author of the book First Globals, dealing with millennials and all these changing demographics. And John, to pick up on what we were talking about before the break, there is Marco Rubio coming out of South Carolina talking about generational change. There is John Kasich looking for some sort of regional advantage up in New England. But whether it's Massachusetts in the Northeast or Nevada in the Southwest, it still looks like Donald Trump is the guy.
Yeah, it really does. And that was such a blowout in South Carolina. You know, every region, he picked up every delegate. And to pick up on something you were talking about a little earlier with Craig, you know, understand that people identify themselves in different ways, and what may press their buttons may be different than what we anticipate. And so I may call myself an evangelical, but I could be a member of the NRA, or I could be working at a steel plant that's about to close, or a textile mill. And so my principal identification may be something other than what my religious ideas. And I think what Donald Trump has done is not only, you know, gotten 31% of that evangelical vote, but also showed that it's not going to be the monolith, I suppose, that Ted Cruz thought that it was going to be.
But I guess we could say, Craig Shirley, that Trump is single-minded in his efforts. Coming out of South Carolina, he's been talking about running the table. Maybe that's proper language to use in the state that has Las Vegas there. If he wins Nevada, can he in fact run the table?
Well, I would say, I think John would agree, is that he is the front runner. There's no doubt about that now. The candidates who have tried to take him on have dropped out, and he is becoming stronger by the day. Let's face it. And now he's headed into even more favorable territory in Nevada, and then in the South, which is presumably more, anti-establishment, more populist, more conservative, and more favorable to Donald Trump. So I think that right now the odds are looking very good. To use a Las Vegas parlance, the odds are very good for Trump.
All righty. Well, go ahead, John.
No, but I will add something in a piece that I wrote over the weekend about a Rubio-Kasich ticket. I've said that before, but I think it's very important right now, regardless of one's feelings about Donald Trump. The sooner this becomes an establishment versus anti-establishment race, the better the establishment has of winning, particularly if Ted Cruz is still in the race and is diluting some of that very conservative vote from Donald Trump.
So, John Zogby, you've talked about this. Larry Sabato at UVA in terms of academia, and now Lindsey Graham, who was polling around zero in his home state of South Carolina, likewise is calling for this, quote, establishment ticket. But Craig, surely that establishment ticket doesn't exactly sound like a dream team to grassroots conservatives, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it smacks. I mean, I think it's an intriguing idea. And also, Laura Ingraham has floated the idea. I think also it smacks just a little bit of desperation. Now, it is reminiscent of 1976 when Reagan, before the Republicans met in Kansas City, he was slightly behind in the delegate count of Gerald Ford. It was unprecedented at the time, but he picked Senator Richard Schweiker of Pennsylvania as his running mate, hoping to probably lose some Pennsylvania delegates, but also some New York and New Jersey delegates, but also to keep his campaign alive, don't forget, because it was 3 weeks out, and CBS had just, their political unit had just conducted a hard count, and they were about to announce that Gerald Ford had gone over the top 3 weeks out. If they had announced that, Reagan's campaign would have been dead in the water. So by picking Schweiker, CBS was forced to junk the story because it just created such a murky situation. So really, it's a fascinating piece of American history and what kept Reagan alive, which really set him up for 1980. I suppose it's a worthwhile idea. I suppose
Well,
it's
let me just try something else out, Craig. A little more recent history, John Zogby. Mitt Romney turned to a member of the House, Paul Ryan, at the time considered conservative, now with his open borders leanings and lack of contentiousness with the president, a little suspect in conservative quarters. Is it possible, both demographically and for news value, that someone like Trump could reach down to a young conservative in the House in a crucial state like Ohio? The name Jim Jordan comes to mind. Is there a possibility of something like that? 30 seconds.
Of course there is, but it all depends whether anybody wants to run with Donald Trump. That's the important thing here. He's got a lot of fence bending to do. Yes, he is showing clearly that he can appeal to a broad swath of Republican voters, but look, he on top of the victory, remember, he has alienated a number of groups, and he's been insulting all the other candidates that are in the field.
All the more reason to look beyond the current field of candidates, I guess. We'll have to leave it there. John Zogby in Key West, Craig Shirley in Northern Virginia. Gentlemen, you have our thanks. Up next, Bernie Kerik, a cut in security budgets? We'll talk about it.